So I was sitting on a local bus back to the train station while visiting Western Japan, and it hit me. I had already lost. I didn't even need to receive an official decision. I had just given the biggest presentation of my life in this country, and the presentation went well, but there was just this feeling while I was on that bus with the scenery passing me by that the gamble that I had made was not going to pay off. For over 2 years, I've been building a business in Japan, something completely outside of teaching English. I've been focused on building something that has real value here. I put together a business intelligence platform and put it in front of some pretty large Japanese organizations. And I've put a lot of time into it, and I've also spent thousands of dollars on it. And now, with the latest failed opportunity, I've got no safety net. I've got really no next step. And I'm looking at an expiring visa roughly 1 year from now. So here's what happened. So just over a year ago, I was introduced to a Japanese civil engineering firm, and they have responsibility for road planning and safety across the region, this area that I live, Osaka, which is called the Kinki region. And the introduction was more sort of out of politeness, didn't really have any expectations from it, but something told me that I should contact the individuals that I met and ask them if they had any specific needs as it relates to digital transformation services. And so surprisingly, they followed up with me and wanted to have a conversation with me. And that's fantastic. But the challenge is that my Japanese skills are not strong enough for these types of meetings or high stakes meetings. So I brought an interpreter along with me. Now, given that I'm a startup organization, or startup company, I should say, I felt like I should not come to the meeting empty-handed. So with an understanding of what they do and what their focus is, I came in with a prototype as it relates to data on road activity as well as safety activity. And they really were impressed with what I had to demo. Well, they also presented their strategic plan, and the plan is really forward thinking. They had a lot of great ideas in it. And so that was a really good discussion, but they were really fixated on the prototype that I brought with me. That was a very positive sign. And coming out of that meeting, they wanted to have a follow-up meeting. Now, what they wanted was really a commentary on their strategic plan. So for the next 2 months, I constructed a blueprint, literally between my apartment and my office, just working dedicated on that particular project. So when we came back, the stakes were very different. It was a much bigger group that we met with, and the atmosphere, there was a lot of tension. And one of the things to know about Japanese meetings, at least for these large organizations, that they're very hierarchical, and also they're very long. They can go upwards of 3 hours. And so there's no breaks in these meetings as well. From the jump, there was a cool reception to what I came to present. And it came from that senior civil engineer. And he wasted no time picking apart the solution that I had proposed and every, or at least many elements of the blueprint that I had put together. And he just really just sort of was persistent in his criticisms and his skepticism. I knew where it was coming from. He was fearful that the solution might ultimately replace him because it is a predictive engine and it includes AI. But the criticisms and the scrutiny were so persistent that I felt like he was putting me on my heels, and almost to the point where he was really kind of diluting the value of the system, and it wasn't his place to do it because obviously he's not the expert in this area. And it sort of dawned on me that there is no executive at the table, at least from my team, to be able to push back on him, that I was the executive. And so I had to determine how to push back on him without undermining him, given his position, and also do it tactfully. And so that I did, just really underscoring the point that this system is not designed to take people's jobs, but help people do their jobs more efficiently. That didn't really change his attitude about things. And so his next point was, you're an unproven company, you don't have any clients, and we're not exactly convinced that you can deliver what you say you're going to deliver. And I couldn't challenge it. He was right. I am a startup company, and I did not have any clients. And so, fair point. And so, from that, it was really sort of, okay, well, prove that you can do what you say you're going to do. So he handed out a task, and that was to build a prototype system that helped with road planning and road safety in the region. That was it. And so I asked him for more specifics, and he said it was really up to me. Now, I don't have all the details in terms of what they do day to day. I only had their strategic plan. And so I said, okay, well, we'll provide our vision in a prototype system. And I asked, well, is there at least any sample data that we could get in order to build this prototype system? No, you'll have to make up your own data. And I was speechless, mainly because it was really almost impossible to be able to build a system without any actual data that reflects what they do. So I thought to myself, no specs, no data, build it all myself, and with my own money, entirely out of pocket. And there really was nothing I could say. So coming out of that meeting, obviously, it wasn't a good feeling, and 2.5 hours was exhausting. But I thought to myself, hey, if I get this opportunity, if I can prove the solution, then I'm set. So for the next 8 weeks, I spent my time building that prototype system, and it was time to meet with them again. And the presentation went really well. This time, the senior engineer, he actually was much more cooperative and had a much more collaborative sort of spirit and asked some really good questions. And so it was quite a shift. And at the end of the meeting, he apologized for really making it difficult for me and really found value in the solution that we pitched. But there was a caveat, and he said, we'd like to get you a small project, but our company moves slowly, so be patient. Well, the months passed by, so Christmas came around, and I thought I should inquire about where things stood, and there was a simple response. A project is forthcoming. We'll follow up with you when we have more details. So that was like a Christmas present for me. So really excited that all the work that had been done from late summer was about to pay off. Well, the new year rolled around, and January, February, March passed, and there was nothing. April came around, there was no correspondence. So I thought I should reach out to him in May and ask where things stood. And it was a simple reply. All projects have been put on hold. And there's no timeline in terms of when there might actually be some activity related to a potential project. I kind of knew it. The weeks and months had passed by, and there was no response. And so it wasn't ideal, but that was the reality. But the harder reality was I had nothing in the pipeline at this point. There were no projects to pursue. There were no prospective clients. And I had this fantastic business intelligence solution that I built that I had no one to put it in front of. So I felt like I had to keep some visibility around it. So I wrote some white papers and started looking at other markets where I could sell this solution into. So that would be Southeast Asia and Europe. And then a couple weeks later, I was on a government procurement site and saw an opportunity for at least a government tender as it relates to a road safety and planning solution. Slightly different than the one that I'd done for the civil engineering firm, but there was so much overlap that I felt like I should pursue it. But here's the caveat. This was a gamble. First, the resources I would have to commit to doing it, if I was not successful with this project, pretty much would force the company to fold. And because of the resources committed, at least for the previous project as well as this forthcoming project, If it didn't work out, I'd have to sell some of the equipment, the development equipment. But I felt like it was worth it. I couldn't walk away from it. And so I put together the proposal, and 1 week after delivering the proposal, was invited to Western Japan to pitch my solution. And so I went down there a couple days early. I wanted to get a feel for the area since I had not been there before. Felt like it would be a bad look to go in there and pitch a solution without knowing anything about their environment. Now, this area is much smaller than Osaka and much more rural. So in Osaka, it's dense and transportation is comprehensive and it moves quite efficiently as well as frequently. Whereas with this particular prefecture, it's quite rural. The trains and buses run hourly. It's quite slow. Well, presentation day came around and showed up, and it was interesting. I was with my interpreter, and there were seven individuals in the room, and 5 of them were men late in their careers. They had to be 60s, and 2 other young men in the room, in the back of the room. I began my pitch, my interpreter echoing everything that I said in Japanese, and the presentation went well. It was a lot of information to present because it was a 37-page proposal. You get 20 minutes to present. But I presented as well as I could, really focused on hitting the key points, the points that they would really be scoring the solution on. And time was up. They did a Q&A and got some good questions from that. And that time was up, 10 minutes for the Q&A. And then it was time to go. Well, you kind of get the feeling that even your exit, that you're being scored on that. So I didn't take my time to put my laptop away or any of my power cables or anything like that. I just literally had everything in my hands and under my arm and walked out the room. And so as we left the building, just replaying how that went, the adrenaline wore off, and was talking to my interpreter about how things went and felt really good about it. And just really sort of recapping, did I miss anything? And then once on the bus, I just knew it at that point. I said, I'm not going to win this project. Just recapping sort of who was in the room and how everything went. These guys, they're not going to gamble their careers on a startup company owned by a foreigner, even if the solution is exactly what they're looking for. And that's the reality of Japanese business, is that it's very much relationship focused. And also this tends to be with sort of larger, well-established companies. Even if the solution is not state-of-the-art or even inferior, they're going to go with the familiar and trusted solution. And so that was the conclusion that I drew when I was on the bus. And then once I made it back to Shinkansen and riding along, speeding along back to Osaka, just looking out at the window in the landscape and just sort of reflecting on what had happened, but also what is to come. I knew that the business was no longer viable and it was time to fold it. I had to think about my finances, everything that had been committed, one to this particular proposal, and then the one committed for the civil engineering firm. So 3 days after the presentation, an email from the prefecture landed in my inbox, and it was the results of my presentation. 196 out of 500 total points. It wasn't a loss, it was a complete blowout. So I went through the scoring matrix just to see sort of where I did well, and obviously with that sort of points gap, where I came up short. The good thing is that I did determine who the company was that won, and it's a Singapore-based company, but they have backing by some pretty large Japanese companies, and they also have an in-market representative. So there was a takeaway with it. I got a sense of where my company really sort of compared and where the gaps were compared to this company that won. And I'm not far off. I need some polish on my own product, but it really was validation that I do have a credible solution. And also I got to understand really where I rank, but I didn't win. So that's just the reality as it relates to doing business in Japan. There was also another big lesson from this, and was to stop pursuing the government contracts. In Japan, and of course in other parts of the world, the procurement process with governments is quite slow, and a lot of resources need to be committed, the type of resources that my company doesn't have. And so for someone like myself to pursue something that's obviously far more direct, the timelines are shorter, and there's a better tolerance for risk, as at least as it relates to the business world. Was it a gamble? Yes. I knew this was a gamble going into it. Would I do it again? Absolutely. I really felt like I could not walk away from this opportunity. I paid a heavy price for it. That's the reality of it. So there is one other good takeaway from it, was a long-standing question that I haven't been able to answer. And what is it that I really want to do professionally? And I've done different things, but at this phase in my career, really not in love or sold on any of those things. And these two projects, these two proposals are mobility related. They are transportation related. And I really do enjoy that, working on helping people move, helping goods and services move. And really, it is transforming. And I know that sounds very corporate-y, but there is a shift in this domain, and that's something that I want to be a part of. I don't think reasonably it'll happen in Japan. I'll have to look at markets where the environment is more favorable to startups, or where there's less of sort of the structural and cultural barriers that are quite common here in Japan. So that brings me to where things stand right now. These particular projects, particularly the most recent one, were just so costly that I actually had to sell the gear that I used to do the development work. The other thing as well is that I've got a platform that needs to find a customer. And so I'm not sure if I'll continue to seek out customers, or if I'll go the professional domain and see if there's the type of job opportunity that will leverage what I put into these two projects. And so as it stands right now, there's really two options. Either go back to English teaching, which would be a defeat on top of the defeats I already suffered, because the skills and the capabilities that I really put into these two projects that really could have been transformative just get sort of swept away, and I'm back to teaching English. So that's where we stand, and I'm really kind of at a crossroads. I enjoy being in Japan, but I do have to think about my career, and teaching English, really, there is no runway as far as that's concerned.